Hello there, I'm Black Bright News, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the Eid gatherings and what's been happening. Apparently, there's been some Tory politicians who have said something about what it feels like when they gather together. And so, this is quite a sensitive subject, so I'm going to approach it sensitively. Hopefully, I don't offend anyone. But yeah, I've called it Understanding Eid Gatherings and the Conversation Around Public Prayer. So I would like to talk about the news headlines surrounding Eid worshippers expressing sadness at claims made by senior politicians, the wider reaction to public prayer, and what it means for people who are trying to understand what they're seeing. There has been a particular focus on large gatherings during Eid al-Fitr, especially in places like Luton, where thousands of people came together for prayer. These are not small, quiet indoor services. They are often outdoor, highly organised and attended by families, friends, and entire communities. People arrive early, dressed in their best clothes, many in traditional outfits, and they stand side by side in rows, moving together through a structured act of worship. For those taking part, it is a moment of gratitude, relief at completing Ramadan, and connection with others. At the same time, there have been comments from individuals connected to the Conservative Party suggesting that public displays of prayer on this scale can be seen as divisive or even as a form of showing dominance. That language has caused upset among many Muslims who feel that something deeply personal and spiritual has been misunderstood and reframed in a way that does not reflect their intentions. For someone who is not familiar with Islamic practices, it is possible to see how a large uniform gathering could feel unfamiliar or even unsettling. When you see thousands of people dressed in a similar way, moving in unison, occupying public space, and temporarily affecting things like traffic or transport, it can register as something outside of your normal experience. If you do not have context, your mind will fill the gaps. That is a very human response, not necessarily a malicious one, but it can lead to conclusions that are not accurate. From the perspective of those attending, there is no intention to exclude, intimidate, or dominate. It is simply the only practical way to accommodate large numbers of people for religious obligation. Many mosques do not have the capacity to hold everyone, so open spaces are used. The structure, the clothing, and the shared actions are all part of the faith itself, not a performance for the outside world. What often gets lost in the headlines is the everyday reality of people involved. These are individuals who work in offices, schools, hospitals, and businesses across the country. They interact daily with colleagues of all backgrounds. They share conversations about family life, weekend plans, food, and celebrations. In many workplaces, including those where a significant number of Muslims wear hijabs, the atmosphere is not closed or insular. It is open, conversational, and welcoming. People greet each other, include one another, and move between cultural spaces without difficulty. The contrast between that everyday experience and the way large gatherings are sometimes portrayed in the media is where the confusion begins. Up close, the interaction is human and familiar. From a distance, especially through headlines or brief video clips, it can look like something separate or self-contained. That gap between lived experience and observed imagery is where fear can grow. There is also the question of disruption, which some people raise, particularly in relation to traffic during large events. When a city experiences gridlock or delays, frustration is understandable. People have places to be, responsibilities to meet, and unexpected disruption can feel inconvenient. But it is important to place that in context. The UK regularly accommodates large public events when there are sporting occasions, festivals, parades, or national celebrations. These also involve road closures, crowd control, and temporary inconvenience. The key difference is familiarity and expectation. When people are used to an event, they tend to accept the disruption as part of the occasion. When something is less familiar, the same disruption can feel more significant. What seems to be happening in this situation is not simply a disagreement. And when I say this situation, I'm talking about the headlines that was talking about the sadness that the Tories, I forget the exact wording, but the Tories were seeing these gatherings as intimidating and a form of domination. So that's when I say this situation. What seems to be happening in this situation is not simply a disagreement about traffic or public space, but a deeper question about identity and belonging. When public expressions of faith are described as being at odds with British identity, it sends a message, whether intended or not, that some people's ways of celebrating and worshipping are less acceptable than others. For those on the receiving end, that can feel like being told that they do not fully belong, even when they're contributing members of society. At the same time, there are people in the wider population who are trying to make sense of visible cultural differences in a country that is changing. Some of their concerns come from uncertainty rather than hostility. They may not have had direct contact or meaningful conversations with Muslims, so their understanding is shaped by what they see in passing or through media coverage. When that coverage focuses on scale, uniformity, or political interpretation, it can reinforce a sense of distance. This is why everyday interactions matter so much. When people share space, work together, and talk openly, the sense of otherness tends to reduce. What remains is a clearer understanding that people can hold different beliefs, dress differently, and celebrate different occasions while still participating in the same society in a cooperative and respectful way. It's also worth recognising that pride in culture is not unique to any one group. People across the UK express pride in their heritage, whether through food, clothing, language, or celebration. The difference lies in which expressions are widely recognised and which are still becoming familiar. As that familiarity grows, the reaction often shifts from uncertainty to acceptance. The current conversation, as reflected in these headlines, is less about a single event and more about how people interpret what they see. One interpretation views collective prayer as a natural expression of faith within a diverse society. Another interpretation, often shaped by distant or political framing, views the same scene as a sign of separation or challenge. The reality for many who experience it up close sits somewhere much simpler. It is a community gathering to mark an important religious moment, carried out in the only way that accommodates everyone who wishes to attend. Understanding does not require agreement or on every point, but it does require context. When context is added, the images change. What might initially appear as something unfamiliar becomes something more recognisable. People coming together, marking a significant day, and then returning to their everyday lives, which include working alongside others who may not share the same beliefs but share the same spaces. In situations like this, the tone of public conversation matters. Language that suggests threat or division can deepen misunderstanding, while languages that explain and contextualize contextualise can reduce it. The goal is not to remove difference, but to understand it well enough that it's no longer threatening. Black Bright News, as that's me, this is a reflection is based on public reported headlines, observable community practices and everyday workplace experiences within the UK. It aims to provide context and human perspective to support understanding across